your child or your loved one, they need to know that you're a safe place that they can fall.
Do you kind of see a synergy within the masking as being an autistic person and the masking around your gender identity?
Really kind of similar sensations, similar feelings, similar difficulties, and it has a similar negative impact on you long term. But I think affirming sexuality and gender identity is really important. Even if it's been 6 months and this is the 5th identity they've come to you with. Tried clubbing. I tried going out on the gay scene. Really struggled with it. Clubs are not necessarily autism friendly.
Hello and welcome to a new episode of This is Autism, a podcast from the North East Autism Society. My name is Kerry Highcock and I'm the Family Development Manager at the charity. Did you know that more than 1/3 of autistic people identify as LGBT+? We wanted to explore the intersection between autism, sexuality and gender identity ahead of Autistic Pride Day on Sunday, June the 18th. Here to help us do that is our guest Erin, Eakins, the queer autistic writer and speaker behind the website Queerly Autistic and the book of the same name aimed at LGBTQIA+ autistic teens.
So Erin, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and why you really started Queerly Autistic?
Yes, of course I can. So I am a queer autistic writer and speaker, Twitter user, attempter of activism. I don't like to say activist. It feels like it comes with a lot of pressure and maybe a little bit of self-importance. So I like to say I attempt activism in my spare time. And I started Queerly Autistic mainly because I needed an outlet to talk about things. I got my diagnosis when I was 23, and it was a whole new world for me to explore, and I've always enjoyed writing. So it just came about one day that I thought, you know what, I'll put this together and I'll start writing about this. I'll start putting my thoughts down and thinking about certain topics and exploring it. So as much as it was about connecting with other people and talking about what I believed and my opinions on certain topics, it was also really important in terms of figuring myself out now as someone who'd been out for a few years as queer, but now I had this whole other identity as well, and you know it reshaped my life. So having that outlet was really important, and it seemed to connect with people. And off the back of that, it sort of spiraled a little bit. I accidentally ended up with a book deal. I don't know how that happened, but I ended up writing this book that I'm really, really proud of. And it's all spiraled from there. And I've got to meet the most amazing people and interact with the most amazing people and find a community that I didn't have before. So it's been quite a journey the last eight years since my diagnosis. Yes.
Yeah, and I imagine there's lots of autistic people out there that are, you know, perhaps on the same journey or starting out on that journey. So what was that really like for you, Erin? You know, what did it feel like, I suppose, to be able to work through and figure out, you know, your own identity?
Well, it's a long old journey, isn't it? I don't think you ever quite reach the destination. I think it's one of those things you go on your whole life, but you can get a bit closer to it and a bit more comfortable with it. So my journey with kind of realizing that I was queer started very, very young. I think my earliest memory of it was when I was 12. I don't remember, but I was looking through diaries a few years ago and I found this entry from when I was 12. And there's the most angsty entry I've ever read in my life where I'm going, I think I have a crush on my teacher. Oh my goodness, this means I'm gay. I'm so stressed about this. What does this mean? I'm very confused. And then like the very next day was a very calm sort of, well, stop being silly, Erin entry that was like, you've got posters of Legolas up on your wall. Why? You can't be gay. This is very silly. What are you talking about? And it wasn't until I was 16 and I saw a bisexual character on TV that I was like, oh, that's a thing. That's a thing. There's a name for this, and this is a thing, and I can be this. So there's been a couple of years there where it was quite difficult because I didn't have the cultural framework to interpret what I was feeling. I remember when I was in secondary school, one of my teachers figured it out before I did, and figured out that there was stuff going on with my sexuality, with my identity, and I'd call in and I'd have meetings with her, and I'd be bawling my eyes out because I was so stressed and upset and I didn't understand why. And I remember she'd pepper her desk with leaflets, but because I was autistic, didn't know I was autistic. I was very I didn't notice them because I wasn't expecting them to be there, and I was very focused, and so I never picked up one of the leaflets. And it wasn't until a few years later that I bumped into her outside of school that she told me that that's what she'd done. And that was the joy of also living in a post Section 28 world. Section 28 was repealed when I was 11, but I was 16, and the teachers were still too scared to broach the subject with me. So there were ripples to that legislation.
No, sorry, Erin, I was just wondering, just for our listeners, could you just clarify what Section 28 means?
Yes, so Section 28, it was a law that was passed in the 80s. I can't remember the exact date, but it was passed in the 80s, and it basically prohibited the quote-unquote promotion of homosexuality. Basically meant that teachers weren't allowed to talk about it. People who were in positions of authority or had any contact or responsibility over children weren't allowed to talk about it. That included scout leaders, guide leaders. It basically stopped kids from being able to learn about anything other than being straight for almost 20 years.
Wow, okay. I had never heard of that before. Okay.
Yes, it was repealed in 2003, but obviously by then you had a whole generation of teachers who'd grown up scared to talk about this. So I come across several instances when I was at school after 2003 where teachers wouldn't talk about it, or teachers were afraid to talk about it. When I was, I think, 20 or maybe 19, 20, I got in touch with my secondary school because I was by that point active in the LGBT association, and I asked them if I could come back and deliver a talk because it would have been really useful when I was at school. And they said, okay, we will let you do this, but here's a very prescriptive list of what you can and can't talk about. And I didn't feel like I could deliver what I wanted to say with that very prescriptive list. So it was still going on even after I left. My old secondary school now is I'm very proud of them because they are apparently one of the most LGBTQ plus kind of accepting schools in the country now. There have been articles written about them, and that change happened because the students formed a queer straight alliance and demanded change and forced the school to change. So think about my time there where you'd get told off if you were holding hands with another girl. It was an all-girls school. And now I look at them getting articles written about them because the students stood up and said, no, you need to be better than this. So it's been really, that's been quite heartwarming, seeing kind of students have that amount of impact. So yeah, by the time I got to university, I was then I tried clubbing. I tried going out on the gay scene, really struggled with it. Clubs are not necessarily autism friendly. So instead I focused on politics. I did some advocacy roles while I was at uni. I took on some officer roles in the LGBT plus association. And then when I was 23, I got my autism diagnosis, and that added a whole other layer. And kind of lens through which to see everything and to understand everything. And I've sort of been figuring it out from that point on. I now have these two really important facets of my identity, how they kind of interweave with each other. And I'm still on that journey. I'm still, I identify as cis, but writing the book and talking about things has made me interrogate my gender in different ways. I have a really interesting relationship with my gender now. As I say, I still identify as cis, but there's just a really it's been a really exciting journey to be on, actually. So it's been a long trip, and I think it's continuing, but it's continuing at a place where I'm currently incredibly comfortable and kind of I have a degree of pride and and acceptance in myself that I didn't have for a really long time.
Yeah, and you know, that's really, really lovely to hear, Erin, I suppose, because, you know, if we think about the research around autistic masking and, you know, leading to burnout and suicidality and all of these, you know, really negative, poor outcomes for autistic people, I'm just interested in, do you kind of see a synergy within the masking as being an autistic person and the masking around your gender identity? Do you see kind of correlations between the two?
Oh, huge amounts. Huge amounts. I think it's I often draw, obviously it's not exactly the same, but there's real kind of commonalities in the, you know, the act of masking and hiding who you are and being in the closet. There's really similar feelings, because obviously I've experienced both, and really kind of similar sensations, similar feelings, similar difficulties, and it has a similar negative impact on you long term. So yeah, I think there is kind of a big, there's a big overlap in terms of and also how you code switch when you're with people you're comfortable with. You know, I'm so much more autistic, quote unquote, around people that I know are going to be safe to be very autistic around, whereas I do still mask around in like work situations or situations where I'm maybe not comfortable. And it's the same with my queerness. If I'm not sure that I'm safe in a situation, I will I will pretend I won't talk about it. It will be slightly different to how I am if I'm in a space where I know I'm safe.
Of course, yeah. And I think that's one of the big things, isn't it? You know, sexuality and being autistic or having disabilities are all marginalised groups and all open to being bullied. And, you know, that's where that masking comes in. It's a protection, isn't it, on many levels? It's a safety mechanism. So I can kind of see that perhaps somebody who is autistic and also has gender or sexuality differences, that there kind of would be multiple layers of masking to kind of peel back and work through to get to the point where you can actually, you know, say, I'm Erin and this is who I am. And a lot of that is about societal attitudes, isn't it? And prejudices and all of that we talk about.
And pressure as well, I think. Pressure and safety. And, you know, I think as much as I wish we lived in a world where we could unmask all the time, we don't live in that world. And, you know, and it's, when I was writing my book, that was something I had to actually to talk about, which was say to people, obviously the ideal is that you come out and you be who you are. But if you're a young person and it's not safe for you to do that, then you might have to stay in the closet for a bit until you're in a safer situation, because your safety comes first. Yeah. And that's really hard, because you want to spread a message of be yourself, but you also want people to be safe. And if they need to code switch in a situation to mask in a situation to be safe, then that's kind of the dilemma you come across.
Yeah. And I mean, I always talk about, particularly with my young people that I work with, about finding your tribe, finding your people, you know, and do you think that the community, the queer community, is accessible for autistic people, or do we have a lot more work to do?
I think a lot more work to do. I think that's true of actually every community. I think most communities have work to do when it comes to general accessibility. I think the queer community, I think there's a real and really wonderful, you know, I'm not in any way disparaging this, there's a really wonderful history in the queer community of spaces like nightclubs and pubs being safe spaces. And I love that part of our history. I love learning about that part of our history. I just can't partake in it. And I have really tried to go to gay bars, and it's just too much stimulation for me. It's too loud. It's too bright. I get very overwhelmed. I have to leave. I almost had a meltdown in a club once, which wasn't the best thing to happen. So while we have those spaces, and I think those spaces need to be preserved and they need to be continued, I think we also need maybe more accessible spaces. We need maybe some quieter spaces. We need kind of, you know, maybe some spaces without alcohol. So I think we have to just widen the type of space that we have. I also think just generally, same with things like Pride. Prides need quiet spaces, need kind of places to get away. I don't go to big Pride parades because I know I can't handle them. I'll go to smaller Pride parades instead, like more local ones. And then you just have, obviously, there are people in the queer community who don't understand being autistic as well, as you get everywhere. So you then get that, you experience that prejudice, and you experience queerphobia and transphobia in the autistic community as well, for the same reason. That if you're not part of that marginalised group, then you have the societal prejudice you've grown up with. So there's a lot of angles that needs to be worked on in terms of being accessible to autistic people. I think LGBT plus spaces are getting better. But we need, people running youth groups to be aware that they may have neurodivergent people in there. They likely will have neurodivergent people kind of that they're looking after. We need to make sure that LGBT plus affirming care that's provided people is also autism informed and neurodivergent informed. So there's a lot of work to do. I think it's getting better. I've requested quiet spaces at Prides and actually had them happen, which is better than it was a couple of years ago. So I think that there is definitely, it's slowly kind of moving forward. I think an issue that you also have with general disability accessibility in queer spaces is that a lot of them are historical. A lot of them are in older buildings that just are inaccessible. My stepmom is a wheelchair user, and there's a lot of gay bars she can't go to because she's a wheelchair user, because the buildings are just not accessible. So there's almost an element of we need to create more accessible spaces. And also, I think disabled people, including autistic people, I think we need to be given the resources and support to create our own spaces as well. I think that's really important.
Yeah, I would totally agree. And actually, a couple of things you touched on there, Erin. It's interesting you mentioned nightclubs or nightlife. It's probably, I don't know what the right phrase is. I'm getting too old. But anyway, that stuff you do. I'm working with a well-known nightclub in Newcastle, actually, that was originally set up for marginalised groups, for people from different ethnic backgrounds. And it was created as a real safe space for marginalised people to come together and really just hang out and have fun and feel protected and feel like it was okay to be who they are. And it's been really interesting that we've started a group with some adolescents, some autistic adolescents, and brought them into that space. And it's interesting that the attitudes and the values that are within that space are absolutely aligned to what we're doing in terms of neurodivergent affirming practice. But actually, you're right, the environment is not autism friendly. I mean, it's a dark nightclub with lots of unusual smells and carpeted floors and different gradients across the club. And it is really interesting that although we're open and we're welcoming in terms of our attitudes, the environment doesn't actually always match up. So I think there is a lot more work to do around just making places a little bit more safer for people, isn't it?
Agreed. And not necessarily meaning that you can't have those spaces, just have alternatives as well. And I think it's really important to say as well, obviously, that my experience in not being able to go to gay bars and stuff is not necessarily a universal autistic experience. I have a couple of autistic people that I know who are actually in some ways maybe more sensory seeking. So they actually thrive in a nightclub environment because they're sensory seeking rather than kind of sensitive in that way. So it's really interesting seeing different autistic people who might need different things, because again, we're not a monolith, so it's not just one solution will work for all autistic people.
Yeah, I agree. We were doing some work around a quiet space actually, and a couple of the young people said, why are you calling it a quiet space? Actually, when I need to calm down, what I need is quite a lot of stimulus, because these young people are quite hypersensitive. And it was just quite an interesting, way of looking at things, that we don't just strip everything back. There are some people that need actually the big, bright, noisy environments. Absolutely. Yeah. So, I mean, in terms of research, Erin, what evidence is there around, the fact that autistic people are more likely to have a fluid sexual or gender identity? What does the research say about all of this stuff?
Well, there's actually been quite a lot in recent years, which is really good. I think for a long time it was mainly anecdotal. It was us saying, well, there's a lot of us, or us going, most of the autistic people I interact with identify as LGBTQIA plus in some way. But that's anecdotal, and that doesn't translate to resources and support. So having research coming up is really, really powerful. The most recent one that I've seen, I think the third number of a third of autistic people, I think that comes from an Autistic Not Weird survey that was done in 2018. That I think I quoted in my presentation. I've since been made aware there was another one done last year. I don't know how I missed that. I think I was asleep.
You're allowed to sleep.
But I'm allowed to sleep sometimes. There's an ADHD side of my brain that's been kicking me recently, so I probably completely missed it from that. But there was an Autistic Not Weird survey in 2022, which it was around about just over 11,000 respondents, and almost 7,000 of those said they identified as autistic. And that one actually found that just over 55% of respondents there autistic respondents identified LGBT plus, so even more. And just over 18% ID'd as trans in that survey. And obviously that's not research that's necessarily done by a university, so it's maybe not counted by some people, but it's a huge data set to have, and does point towards something. But in terms of sort of official quote unquote research, there's been more of that kind of going on in recent years. And there was a big study by Cambridge University's Autism Research Centre in 2021, which was research into kind of sexual behaviours of autistic people. It was just over 1,000 autistic people versus just over 1,000 non-autistic people between the ages of 16 and 90. So big, broad age range. And they found that autistic men were 3.5 times more likely to consider themselves bisexual than non-autistic men. Autistic women were 3 times more likely to identify as gay in comparison to non-autistic women, and that autistic people were generally 8 times more likely to self-identify as asexual or as other sexuality, which obviously covers a huge amount because they weren't asking beyond the L, the G, the B, and then they asked about the A as well.
Okay.
And in terms of gender identity, there's been a couple of studies. A lot of them were quite small studies in the last 10 years or so. But there was a big one back in 2020, again by Cambridge University, and they actually brought together lots of different data sets rather than relying on let's look at this gender identity clinic, or let's look at that gender identity clinic, because gender identity clinics are a good place to start, but obviously that's a small sample, and also obviously these are people who've been officially diagnosed with some kind of gender dysphoria. Yeah. So it might not be the full picture, or they're getting kind of affirming care at least. But they did a big study. They brought together lots of different data sets, and they found that trans and gender diverse people, that was their wording, are up to 6 times more likely to be autistic. So the research really does show that there is a huge correlation.
Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely. Everything that we kind of anecdotally been saying for a really long time is beginning to be backed up by this research. The research isn't unproblematic. There are issues with research, big issues with not involving autistic people and queer and trans people from the beginning. So a lot of the questions are maybe not inclusive in terms of the language they use, or they're not inclusive of trans identities. The sexuality one was particularly bad for that. It really didn't really accept that there were trans identities. So some results may be slightly skewed as a result. It looked like they were focusing on assigned sex at birth rather than on how someone identifies now, or what someone's true gender is. Or there's a failure to engage with the wider scope. So they're not asking, well, if you're not LGB or A, what do you identify as? It's just other. So there's just this anomalous other. And there's a lot of inherent like biases and presumptions. I talked about this in my talk at the conference as well. That when I was writing my book, I went looking for studies, and the first one I found was one where they said, well, yes, a lot of autistic people who responded said that they were LG or B, but they're not actually having sex with anyone of the same gender right now, therefore they're probably not, as if and that they also came to the conclusion that a lot of the men were saying that they were gay or queer, but that they weren't. They were just nervous about talking to women.
Right. Yeah. So there's lots of things, lots of complexities, isn't there? Wow. I think, Erin, what we'll do is we'll take a little break, and then when we come back, we'll talk a little bit maybe about why we think there's such a huge correlation between the two. And then look at what support might look like for young people and autistic adults, if that's all right.
Perfect.
So we'll take a break and we'll see everybody very soon.
Hi, while we're on a quick break, I thought I'd tell you a little bit more about the Family Development Service here at the North East Autism Society. The Family Development Services provides support for families pre, during and after diagnosis and includes a variety of services including our parent and toddler groups, autism hubs, workshops for families, a dedicated enquiry line and our resource site as well, which can be found at the family resource site on the North East Autism Society website. So if you go to www.ne-as.org.uk and go along to the family development site, you can find all the information there.
Hi, welcome back to This is Autism podcast. Today we are discussing autism, sexuality and gender identity with Erin Eakins. In part one, we talked a lot about accessibility for autistic people, a little bit about Erin's journey and figuring out her own identity, and looking really at some of the research that's out there around this very, very important topic. So we're going to go straight back in with the next question for Erin. I suppose now, Erin, what we really want to think about is support. So, if a young person is on a similar journey or on the start of this journey of understanding their sexuality or gender identity, do you have any tips for families, I suppose? That would be my first question for the families, because I do a lot of work with families in this situation, actually, where they're really stuck and they don't know where to go or what to do.
Yeah, I think obviously there's an element of individualism that, blanket advice, it might not work for your child or your loved one or yourself. But I think the big ones for me are it's so important to have to know that your family has your back and that your family supports you. I know I'm really lucky to have parents who are incredibly supportive, and I know that that's made my life easier in ways that I might not ever really understand because I've not been in a situation where my parents didn't accept me. I know from speaking to so many other people who haven't had that, how devastating it is, and how lucky I was to be in a supportive situation. So I think the big thing for me is, I think, as particularly aiming at parents or carers or guardian, I think your child or your loved one, they need to know that you're a safe place that they can fall. That's the most important thing for me. They need to know that if something goes wrong or they're upset or the world is awful to them, you are the safe place that they can fall to. And I think that's kind of my primary thing, is make sure that your child knows that. Another thing that I would say is, I think you really have to affirm your child, even if they come to you and they say, I think I identify as this, and you're like, well, I don't know what that means. Or it's really important to affirm. That doesn't mean obviously supporting behavior that might be unsafe. I think that's a really important distinction. I've known a few people whose coming out process, they felt like they maybe had to get themselves into situations that weren't healthy or comfortable for them, particularly around sexuality, in order to be sure of their sexuality. And obviously we need to, that's not ideal. You don't have to do that to figure yourself out. But I think affirming sexuality and gender identity is really important. Even if it's been 6 months and this is the 5th identity they've come to you with in the 6 months, it's a process of finding labels and trying them on and see what works. And some people will go through a few before they find one that fits. Other people will always know who they are. Some other people might not. So you just need to be kind of affirming that that's their truth in that moment. And it might not ever change from that point, but if it does change, they've got somewhere else in their journey now. So I think that's the affirmation and awareness that this is a journey, and they might try new labels and try new things. That's really important. And another one is to have honest conversations. I think a lot of the time, and I think in the past, we've done autistic and neurodivergent, otherwise neurodivergent children and young people a great disservice by not having honest conversations and education about sex and relationships and gender. And I think we've really kind of let kind of whole generations down on that front, because how can you be safe and empowered if you don't have the knowledge to do it? Even myself, I say most of what I learned about queerness and sex, I learned from being in fandoms, which is not the ideal place to learn about those things, certainly not on the internet. And that was with me having a supportive family. So we really do need to, and it was mainly because I was living in the aftermath of Section 28, and so we didn't have that comprehensive, inclusive sex and relationship education.
Erin, could you just clarify for me what fandom is?
Fandom. Fandom is it's like it's short for fandominion. I think it's basically when you're really obsessed with something, and it's the community where you're obsessed with it.
Okay.
So I was in Torchwood fandom, and it basically meant I spent a lot of time on internet forums talking about Torchwood. I'm currently in EastEnders fandom, which means that I spend a lot of time online talking about EastEnders.
I love EastEnders.
I love EastEnders.
Brilliant.
I have a love-hate relationship with the whole soap genre, but I do love a bit of soap. So that's what fandom is. Fandom is that fan space. I have friends from fandom that I've been friends with for 10 years, and they are my best friends. So we met on forums, and now we're still friends, and we've gradually all realised that we're all neurodivergent, which is probably, well, you did meet in a fan forum. So that was where I learned a lot, and obviously it wasn't ideal. That really wasn't the ideal space, because I was lucky that I made friends with some older queer people in Torchwood fandom who really helped me. But I could have made friends with the wrong person online and not realised. So it could have been very unsafe when I was 16 and 17. So I think having those conversations, even the really uncomfortable ones, like talking about porn, I get a lot of pushback because I talk about porn, and my answer is always, you not talking to your child about porn is not going to stop your child watching porn. Yes. There is a very high chance they've probably already seen some.
Yeah.
So you need to have a conversation with them about, well, if you're going to watch it, you need to know this, and you need to know this. You need to be safe. You need to understand that this is not reality, that this is violent, that I think and they're uncomfortable conversations, but you have to have them.
Of course. It's kind of that, it feels like a bit of a balance between obviously complete, validation for somebody's expression, but also as a parent carer balancing that with the risk element, isn't it? It's, we've got to keep our children, young people safe, absolutely, but also allow them to feel validated, and it's okay to identify as. You mentioned before, Erin, loosely about representation. So I'm just interested about, do you think we're getting better at representation in the media of autistic queer people or people with, gender differences? Do you think we're going in the right direction?
I think it's getting better. I think I remember, and I'm going to, we'll talk about fandom. When I was in fandom in 2008, 2007, having actual queer representation was actually quite rare. And a lot of it was what we would call headcanoning, where you read the unwritten bits of a character and go, oh, this character's gay, but they're not saying so. And then you do that. So I did a lot of that when I was a teenager, whereas now it's there's a lot of kind of queer characters. It's not perfect. I remember back in 2000 and I remember back in 2011 with Christian and Saeed on EastEnders. I remember they had the soap's first ever gay bed scene where they were basically cuddling topless in bed, and they got like 150 to 200 complaints, and it was written about in the Daily Mail. But now you see that and that whole story was very kind of nervously and tentatively done, because they didn't want to have them too close because they were worried about backlash. Whereas now you have kind of characters who are queer characters in queer relationships just wandering around all of the soaps actually, and I think that's shows a big leap. And the same with we're definitely getting better with autistic characters as well. I mean, we recently had a kind of Spark come out, which I'm obsessed with.
It looks wonderful. It looks brilliant. People need to check
beautiful.
it out if they've not looked at that.
Makes me cry. It's so good. I've just finished showing it to my parents, so I've dragged them along with me.
Where can people find that, Erin? Where can they watch it?
A Kind of Spark is available on iPlayer, so it's a CBBC show. All of the autistic characters are played by autistic actors. It's based on a book by Elle McNichol, who is an autistic author, which is also brilliant, and you should definitely read it. And there's a lot of people kind of, obviously it being a CBBC show, it's not there, but there's a lot of readings of some of the characters as being queer by people who are fans of the show. So that's a whole conversation. So we're getting a lot better. Then in the same vein, it's only been a couple of years since we had Sia's film music come out, which was horrific.
Which caused, yes,
quite a lot terrific.
And controversy and not.
And we still have those issues around casting and the way characters are written. So I mean, I don't think we're at a perfect point of representation by a long way. I think we're a lot further along than we were a few years ago. In terms of queer autistic characters, there's not a huge amount of them. I think it's not something that's been broached yet. It's sort of, you have they've got queer representation has got better and autism representation's got better, but it's not kind of merged. I think there was I can't remember the name of the show. I think it's Everything's Gonna Be Okay, which was a show which did feature queer autistic characters. It was two women in a relationship who were both autistic, which was, I haven't had a chance to watch it, but I've seen some of the clips where one of them's stimming and she says, I love you for the first time, and then has to get down and her assistant's dog lies on her to apply pressure because she's overstimulated because she's just said, I love you for the first time. And I remember bawling my eyes out when I watched that. So we're getting there, but I'm a big... I wouldn't be where I was today if I hadn't seen fictional characters. They've always been really important for me.
And as well, I think around other neurodivergence. So in the last couple of weeks, I've seen quite a push around ADHD. So in Waterloo Road, we now have, I don't think they're played by characters that have ADHD, but Waterloo Road and EastEnders are both talking about people that have ADHD, which I think is good as well, because often that doesn't have the same community feel, I don't think, as the autistic community perhaps. I know there's been a lot of discussion lately around that on Twitter. So it's good to see representation of all, isn't it? Which is what we want.
It's really good.
Brilliant. When you were talking about the scene in EastEnders, actually, with Christian and Saeed. Was it Saeed? Was that his
Christian
name?
and Saeed, yes.
Yeah. I was thinking back to Oh my goodness, it must have been like 25. I'm not going to give my age away, but about 25 years ago when it was the first lesbian kiss in Brookside with Beth.
Oh yes,
I
Anna
don't know if-
Friel.
I might have been. I might be older than you, but
I might
honestly,
have watched it
yeah,
on YouTube.
as a like a child / young person, I was like, what is going on? And I remember all the adults around me being like, this is so wrong. We need people in school were saying, we need to write letters. This can't be on Brookside. It's a community-friendly family show. And, so we are moving forward. We are, but we still got
a long way
to go.
It's a long way to go. We still disproportionately kill off queer characters, which is very upsetting. We need to stop doing that, I think. I think compared to where we were, we're a million miles ahead. But yeah, it's still not perfect by a long way.
Still need more representation, absolutely. Mm-hmm. So in terms of autistic pride, before we finish, Erin, how do you celebrate autistic pride? Do you go to any events? What will you be doing this year?
I'm not getting anything booked this year. I'll probably be on Twitter talking about it. I might, I don't know, get a cake or order dessert to my house or something, have some fun with it. I am at Autistic Inclusive Meets Autism Pride Fair on I think it's the 30th of July, so a little bit after Autistic Pride. But I'm going to be there in London, in Woolwich, so I will be there with books and signing and just talking to people if anyone's interested in popping along. Autistic Pride itself, not got anything booked so far. In fact, I think I'm at a conference for my 9-to-5 job. So kind of probably doing something incredibly dull and boring and not as related to being queer and autistic as I would like. But I'll try and sneak it in somehow.
Get it in there, yeah. Your authentic self, absolutely.
Yeah,
brilliant. Absolutely. So, Erin, you've had loads of stuff going on, books, conferences, events, talks. What are you doing next? What is the grand plan? What do you hope to do?
I'd like to start posting more on my website again. You might have noticed it's a bit scarce on there at the moment. When I was writing my book, it was a bit scarce because I was writing the book. And then after the book came out, I hit burnout, which has affected my concentration ever since. I'm still getting my concentration and focus back from that getting it back. It's not coming back. I'm finding ways to deal with it. I'm finding coping mechanisms. So I'm going to keep trying to update that. So if anyone wants to keep an eye on it, there's a year's worth of stuff on there. It's queerlyautistic.com. Big picture of my face on it, just in case you missed it. So I'm hoping to keep that a bit more updated, maybe start writing a few more articles for it again. I'm also currently working on a follow-up to Queerly Autistic, and this is a workbook. So it's a very, very different, hoping to have sort of exercises and fun things and quizzes that people can do for kind of young autistic people around sexuality and gender.
Oh, that'd be brilliant. That'll be fantastic. I've just had literally a book delivered on autistic burnout, which is a workbook for autistic young people. I really love that idea. It's just arrived today off Amazon. I love the idea of a workbook, giving something really practical to work through and explore. That'd be brilliant.
Things to do, like fun things I've got. I think I've got something in there like design your own pride flag for you. Like, what would your pride flag look like?
I love it.
I'd have loved to have done that as a kid. So we've so I'm working on that. I'm not sure when that will be out, as it is. I'm currently it's a work in progress, but hoping it will be out soon. Obviously, I'll start shouting about it when it does come out. I'd love to do some more speaking engagements, but I've not got any booked at the moment. But if I do, I'll get it kind of flashed up. But in the meantime, I'll probably just keep talking about autism and queerness and EastEnders and on social media. It's currently looking like my Autistic Pride blog is going to be me gushing about my favourite EastEnders character.
Who is it, by the way? Who is it?
Oh, it's Ben Mitchell.
Oh no, Erin.
He's my traumatized boy, and I love him very much.
Yeah, he has a very complex character.
Oh, he does. He's incredibly complex, and so I'm going to write about kind of neurodivergence and trauma using his character as a springboard.
Brilliant.
So that's probably going to be on my Autistic Pride post this year, my article this year. Yeah, lots of stuff happening. Really exciting.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Well, please keep us posted, Erin, with everything you do, and we'll share it out there because you're doing some wonderful things. And just really a big thank you for being a guest on the podcast. To everybody that's listening, if you do have any questions or comments about anything you've heard today, and we've covered quite a lot of stuff, please get in touch. You can get in touch on our email, which is info@ne-as.org.uk. We will be launching our next episode of This is Autism in July, which is really going to focus on healthcare and looking at some of those inequalities in healthcare, accessibility, and really looking at how we can make things that little bit better. So please share, like, follow. You can subscribe to this podcast on Apple, Google, Spotify, and you can also follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram and LinkedIn. Or you can just check out our website, which is www.ne-as.org.uk, and we shall speak to you all very soon. Thank you. Bye.